In a packed courtroom, a police officer does the unthinkable. He kicks a decorated black Navy SEAL from behind. He expected the hero to lash out, to prove the cop's narrative right. Instead, he unleashed the silent, calculating fury of a special operator. This is the stunning story of how that SEAL, a man forged in combat, refused to be broken. See how he struck back, not with his fists, but with a will of steel, and how in the fight for his honor, he found an unexpected partner in justice and in love. You think you know how this ends? Think again. The air in the Harris County Courthouse was its own special brand of stale. It was a cocktail of cheap coffee, old paper, and the low-grade anxiety of dozens of people waiting for their lives to be nudged one way or another by the slow, grinding gears of the justice system. For Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thorne, retired, it was just another box to be checked, another civilian absurdity to be navigated with the same stoic patience he'd once used to wait out enemy patrols in the frozen mountains of the Hindu Kush. He sat on the hard wooden bench, his back perfectly straight, a stark contrast to the slouching, weary bodies around him. At 6'2", with a frame carved from 2 decades of relentless service as a Navy SEAL, Marcus was an island of disciplined stillness in a sea of fidgeting. His suit, a simple charcoal gray, was immaculately tailored, a suit of armor as functional as the body armor he'd worn for most of his adult life. He was here for a failure to comply charge, a ludicrous escalation of a broken taillight traffic stop. A rookie cop, Officer Miller, high on his own authority, had barked orders. Marcus, who had taken commands from men whose words decided the fate of nations, had responded with calm, measured questions. That was his mistake. In Miller's world, questions from a black man in a souped-up vintage Mustang were not requests for clarification. They were acts of defiance. Across the crowded gallery, a woman with a fiery red ponytail caught his eye for a fleeting second. She was scribbling furiously in a leather-bound notebook, her brow furrowed in concentration. He'd met her once for a hurried 10-minute consultation. Sarah Jenkins, his court-appointed public defender. She'd seemed sharp, professional, if a little overwhelmed by the sheer volume of her caseload. She'd looked at his file, at the pristine record of a man who had received the Navy Cross, and then at the flimsy, almost insulting charge. "This is ridiculous," she had muttered, more to herself than to him. "We'll get this dismissed." Marcus appreciated her confidence, but he held no illusions. He'd seen enough of the world to know that ridiculous and reality were often one and the same. His life now was a series of quiet, solitary routines. A 5-mile run at dawn through Memorial Park. The Houston humidity, a familiar, oppressive blanket. The meticulous cleaning of his small, Spartan apartment. The hours spent at the workshop, restoring classic cars. The only place where the roar of an engine could drown out the silence that had followed him home from the battlefield. It was the silence that was the hardest. The silence left by his team, his brothers. The silence left by Leo, his best friend, whose smiling face was tucked into the sun visor of his Mustang. Leo, who hadn't made it back from their last deployment. Marcus was navigating a new kind of war, one fought not in dusty villages, but in the quiet corridors of his own mind. This courthouse, this petty charge, was just another skirmish. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Thompson!" The bailiff's voice boomed, and the room shuffled to its feet. Marcus rose, his gaze fixed forward. Sarah gave him a brief, reassuring nod as she took her place at the defendant's table. The prosecutor, a young man with an ill-fitting suit and an air of smug ambition, laid out the state's case with theatrical gravity, as if a broken taillight was a threat to the very fabric of society. Then, Officer Miller was called to the stand. He swaggered to the witness box, his uniform crisp, his chin held high. He recounted the traffic stop, his voice dripping with condescension. He painted Marcus as aggressive, non-compliant, a potential threat, Every word was a careful, deliberate twist of the truth. Sarah, in her cross-examination, was a study in controlled demolition. "Officer Miller, you stated my client was aggressive. Can you describe this aggression?" "He had a tone. He refused to follow my instructions. His instructions to immediately place his hands on the hood of his car before you had even explained the reason for the stop. It's a matter of officer safety." Miller puffed his chest out. "Officer safety? For a broken taillight? Was Senior Chief Thorne armed?" "I couldn't know that at the time." "Did you find any weapons on his person or in his vehicle?" "No, but—" "So, the aggression was a tone of voice, and for this tone, you felt it necessary to arrest a man with a spotless record, a man who has served this country with distinction for 20 years. The prosecutor objected, but the point was made. The jury, a collection of tired-looking citizens, seemed to be leaning their way. Judge Thompson looked bored, eager to move on to the next case. It was, as Sarah had predicted, ridiculous. It was going to be dismissed. Marcus allowed himself a flicker of relief. He could get back to his workshop, back to the comforting logic of carburetors and pistons. The judge addressed the prosecutor. "Unless you have anything else, I'm inclined to dismiss this. It seems like a waste of the court's time." This was the moment of victory. Officer Miller, stewing in the witness box, caught Marcus's eye. It was a look of pure, undiluted venom. A look that said, "You may have won this round, but you are still beneath me." As Miller stepped down from the stand to walk back to the prosecution's table, his path took him directly behind where Marcus was seated. The space was tight. For a split second, his bulky frame shielded him from the view of the judge and most of the jury. And then it happened. It wasn't a hard kick. It was a coward's move. The scrape of a polished black shoe against the back of Marcus's calf, followed by a sharp, deliberate dig of the toe into his Achilles tendon. It was a gesture of profound contempt, a schoolyard bully's tactic delivered in a court of law by a man in a uniform. It was designed to provoke, to humiliate, to remind him of his place. Time seemed to slow down. The dull throb in his ankle was nothing. He'd endured far worse. But the insult, the sheer audacity of it, landed like a physical blow to his chest. Every instinct, honed by years of training to react to threats with overwhelming force, screamed at him to rise, to turn, to neutralize the threat. He could have Miller on the floor before the bailiff could even unholster his weapon. A dozen ways to disable him flashed through his mind, each one swift and brutally efficient. His body tensed, a coiled spring of controlled power. His hands, resting on his knees, clenched into fists, so tight his knuckles turned white. But then, he thought of Leo. He thought of the SEAL ethos. The only easy day was yesterday. Honor. Courage. Commitment. A SEAL did not react. A SEAL acted. A SEAL controlled the environment. He was never controlled by it. Losing his cool here, in this room, would be a betrayal of everything he was, everything he had ever been. It would be giving Miller the victory he so desperately craved. So Marcus Thorne did the hardest thing he had ever done in his life. He did nothing. He sat perfectly still, his back ramrod straight, his eyes fixed on the American flag standing in the corner of the room. He let the pain in his ankle radiate upwards, a burning line of indignation, and he absorbed it. He mastered it. But he wasn't the only one who had noticed. Sarah Jenkins, turning to give him a celebratory whisper, had seen it all. Her eyes had been fixed on her client, and she saw the subtle shift in Miller's path. She saw the flick of his foot. She saw the minute, almost imperceptible flinch in Marcus's shoulders, the sudden tension in his jaw. Her mind, trained to observe every detail, every nuance, registered the act with perfect, horrifying clarity. Her breath caught in her throat. The whispered "we won" died on her lips. Her face, moments before flushed with victory, turned pale with shock, then crimson with a rage that was cold and pure. She looked from Marcus's rigid back to Miller, who was now smirking as he sat down. The judge banged his gavel. Case dismissed. The words barely registered. The battle was over. But for Sarah Jenkins and Marcus Thorne, the war had just begun. The courthouse hallway was a chaotic river of bodies. But for Marcus and Sarah, it was a silent, charged space. The dismissal of the case was a hollow victory, a footnote to the real crime that had just been committed. "I saw it," Sarah said, her voice low and trembling with fury. She had guided him to a quiet alcove, away from the prying eyes and ears. "That son of a bitch, he kicked you." Marcus finally looked at her. His eyes, usually so calm and unreadable, held a deep, turbulent storm. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "It's over. Let's just go." "Go?" "Marcus, no, that was assault. In a courtroom, by an officer of the law. We can't just go." "And do what?" he countered, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "File a report? With whom? His buddies at the precinct? The DA who just tried to prosecute me? It's my word against a cop's. We know how that story ends." He was already turning to leave, to retreat back into the quiet solitude of his life, where he could manage his own battles. But Sarah stepped in front of him, blocking his path. She was 5'5" and had to crane her neck to look up at him. But her stance was as immovable as a mountain. "No," she said, her green eyes flashing. "I saw it. I am a witness, an officer of the court. That changes the story." Marcus studied her for a long moment. He saw the genuine outrage in her face, the fierce determination. It was a look he recognized. It was the look of a warrior, just a different kind. He had spent his life surrounded by men who ran toward the sound of gunfire. Sarah Jenkins, it seemed, was the type to run toward injustice. "Why?" he asked, the question genuine. "Your job is done. The case is dismissed. You don't get paid for this part." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "I became a public defender because I believe the system, for all its flaws, is supposed to work for everyone. Not just the rich or the powerful. What I just saw, that was the system spitting on its own principles. It's not about getting paid, it's about—" She trailed off, searching for the words. "Honor," Marcus supplied, his voice barely a whisper. She met his gaze, and in that moment, a profound understanding passed between them. "Yes," she said. "Honor." That one word was the key. It was the language he understood. He had lived his life by a code, and he had just been confronted by a man who had none. To walk away felt like a betrayal of that code. "Okay," he said, the word costing him more than she could ever know. It meant stepping out of the shadows and into the light. It meant engaging in a fight on a battlefield he didn't understand, with rules he didn't know. But he wouldn't be fighting it alone. "What do we do?" A slow, determined smile spread across Sarah's face. "Now, we strike back." The next few days were a blur of activity. Sarah's tiny, cluttered office, overflowing with files and legal texts, became their war room. Her initial move was to file a formal complaint with the Houston Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. It was a long shot, a procedural necessity. But it put the department on notice. Next, she filed a motion with Judge Thompson, formally alleging assault and requesting the courtroom security footage. "They'll fight it," she warned Marcus as they sat opposite each other, a container of lukewarm takeout between them. "They'll claim the cameras didn't capture the angle, that the footage is corrupted. They will protect their own. But you have to try," Marcus stated. It wasn't a question. "We have to try," she corrected him, and he noticed she always said, "we." While they waited for the bureaucratic machinery to grind, Sarah started digging. She spent hours in the law library, researching civil rights lawsuits against police officers. She was meticulous, relentless. Marcus, accustomed to action, found the waiting difficult. He channeled his energy into the one thing he could control: information. "Give me everything you have on Miller," he said one evening. Sarah slid a thin file across the desk. "It's not much. 3 years on the force, A couple of commendations for minor drug busts, no official complaints. No official complaints, Marcus echoed, picking up on the nuance. He took the file home. Using skills he was never supposed to use on American soil, he began his own investigation. He wasn't hacking government servers. He was more subtle. He scanned social media, public records, online forums for disgruntled citizens. He was looking for patterns, for whispers. He was hunting. He found it on a neighborhood watch forum for the district Miller patrolled, a post from 6 months ago by a user named Mama C. It described a traffic stop for a rolling stop sign that had left her teenage son shaken and terrified. The officer's name was Miller. The description of his arrogance, his barely veiled aggression, was chillingly familiar. He brought it to Sarah the next day. Her eyes lit up. This is good. It shows a pattern of behavior, a predisposition for intimidation. Their working relationship fell into a comfortable rhythm. She was the strategist, the master of the legal battlefield. He was her intelligence officer, her reconnaissance unit. They spent long hours together, fueled by coffee and a shared sense of purpose. In these hours, the professional walls began to crumble. She learned about his passion for classic cars, how he found a sense of order and peace in the mechanical logic of an engine. He would talk about the satisfying roar of a perfectly tuned V8 with a quiet passion she found captivating. He, in turn, learned about her. She was the daughter of a union organizer, a man who had spent his life fighting for the little guy. She'd put herself through law school at the University of Texas, driven by a burning desire to hold power accountable. She confessed that the cynicism of her job was wearing her down, that his case was the first in a long time that felt truly righteous. One night, while they were poring over legal precedents, she noticed him rubbing his ankle. "Does it still hurt?" she asked softly. He stopped, surprised she'd noticed. "No, not really." "You're lying," she said, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. He sighed, a rare crack in his stoic facade. "It's a reminder." "Of the kick?" "Of the arrogance," he clarified. "Of the assumption that I would just take it. That I was powerless." Sarah leaned forward, her expression earnest. "You, Marcus Thorne, are the least powerless person I have ever met." His eyes met hers across the cluttered desk. The air in the small office crackled with an energy that had nothing to do with legal statutes. He saw not just a lawyer, but a woman of incredible strength and conviction. She saw not just a client, a decorated hero, but a man of profound depth and a quiet, hidden vulnerability. The phone on her desk rang, shattering the moment. It was a senior partner from the public defender's office. Sarah's expression hardened as she listened. "What is it?" Marcus asked, the second she hung up. "That was a friendly warning," she said, her voice laced with sarcasm. "I've been advised to drop this. That suing a police officer is bad for our office's relationship with the HPD. That it's a losing battle and a waste of resources." "They want you to stand down," Marcus said. "They ordered me to stand down," she corrected, her eyes blazing. "They said if I pursue this, I'm on my own. I'll be fired." Marcus felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He had brought this war to her doorstep. He had put her career, her livelihood, in the crosshairs. "Sarah," he began, his voice heavy with guilt, "you don't have to do this. I can't ask you to sacrifice your job for me." Sarah stood up and began to pack her briefcase with a fierce, deliberate energy. She looked at him, and all the weariness, all the cynicism she'd ever felt was gone, replaced by a clarity that was as bright and sharp as a diamond. "You didn't ask me to, Marcus," she said, slinging her bag over her shoulder. "I'm choosing to. They think they can intimidate me. They think they can intimidate us. They're about to find out how wrong they are." She walked to the door and paused, looking back at him. "Are you coming? We have a witness to find. I think it's time we paid a visit to Mama's." Marcus rose to his feet. The guilt was still there, but it was overshadowed by a powerful wave of admiration and something else, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a very long time. He was not just an ally in a legal fight. He was her partner. And for the first time since he'd come home, he didn't feel alone. Finding Mama C was easier than they expected. Her real name was Cynthia Williams, a high school principal with a will of iron and a deep-seated distrust of authority figures who abused their power. When Sarah and Marcus showed up on her doorstep, she recognized Marcus instantly from the local news clips about his dismissed case. "I knew it," she said, ushering them into her immaculately kept living room. "When I saw your face, I told my husband, 'That's a good man. I can see it in his eyes.' And I knew that officer, Miller, was a snake. I saw it in his, too." Her son, a quiet 17-year-old named Jamal, recounted his story. It was a mirror image of Marcus's experience, minus the arrest, the same condescending tone, the same unnecessary escalation, the same attempt to intimidate and belittle. Cynthia had filed a complaint, but it had vanished into a bureaucratic black hole. "They protect their own," Cynthia said, her voice laced with a weary resignation that grated on Sarah. "But I'll testify. I'll tell them exactly what I told the useless man at Internal Affairs. I'll do it for my son, and I'll do it for you, Senior Chief." Marcus simply nodded, his gratitude too deep for words. He saw in Cynthia the same fierce, protective instinct he saw in Sarah. The world, it turned out, was full of quiet warriors. Their small victory was short-lived. A few days later, Judge Thompson's office responded to their motion. As Sarah had predicted, the request for the security footage was denied. The official reason was that the primary camera covering that angle had been malfunctioning on the day in question. "Malfunctioning!" Sarah spat, slamming the document down on the passenger seat of Marcus's Mustang. They were parked outside the courthouse, the setting sun painting the Houston sky in shades of orange and purple. "It's a lie, a blatant, bald-faced lie." Marcus stared out the windshield, his hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. He wasn't surprised. He was disappointed. Disappointed in a system he had sworn to protect. "So, it's her word," he said, gesturing to the courthouse. "Against ours." "Our word and Cynthia's," Sarah corrected, but her voice lacked its usual fire. The denial was a significant blow. Without the video, the case became a messy, he-said-she-said affair. Marcus felt the weight of her disappointment. He had pulled her into this fight, and now she was facing a wall of institutional corruption with him. He turned the key in the ignition, and the Mustang's engine rumbled to life, a low, powerful growl. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice tired. "My place," he said. Not his apartment, his workshop. It was a massive, converted warehouse in a semi-industrial part of the city. Inside, it was a cathedral of steel and chrome. A half-restored 1969 Camaro sat on a lift, its guts exposed. Tools lined the walls in perfect military order. And in the corner, under a canvas tarp, was another car. "This is where you find your peace," Sarah said, looking around in awe. The air smelled of oil, metal, and hard work. It was the complete opposite of her world of paper and arguments. It was a world of tangible results. "It's logical," Marcus said, walking over to the Camaro. "A problem has a solution. You just have to find it. There are rules, physics, mechanics. They don't lie." He saw her run a hand over the dusty fender of a vintage Ford pickup. He saw the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. For the first time, he was seeing her outside the context of the battle. He saw the woman, not just the lawyer. "What's under the tarp?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. He hesitated for a fraction of a second. "That one's personal." He walked over and pulled back the canvas. Underneath was a 1967 Shelby GT500, its raven black paint gleaming even in the dim light. It was in pristine condition, a masterpiece of American muscle. "Wow," Sarah breathed. It's beautiful. It was Leo's, Marcus said quietly. The name hung in the air between them. He had mentioned his friend before, but never elaborated. Now, in the sanctuary of his workshop, the story came pouring out. He told her about Leo, the loud, funny, brilliant kid from Louisiana who could disarm a bomb with the same steady hands he used to play the blues on his guitar. They had gone through BDS training together, had fought side by side for over a decade. This car was his dream, Marcus continued, his voice thick with memory. He talked about it all the time, said when we got out we'd open a workshop together, restore classics. He bought it piece by piece, had parts shipped to our fobs. I promised him I'd finish it if anything happened. He fell silent, his hand resting on the Shelby's cool metal hood. The silence in the workshop was different from the silence in his apartment. This was a silence filled with ghosts, with memories, with the weight of a promise kept. Sarah moved to stand beside him, her presence a quiet comfort. She didn't offer platitudes or empty condolences. She just stood with him in his grief. The day of the traffic stop, Marcus said, his gaze distant. I had just gotten the engine to turn over for the first time. I was taking it for a short drive. For him. He finally looked at her, and his eyes were raw with a pain he had kept locked away for so long. When Miller was yelling at me, all I could think was that he was disrespecting this car. He was disrespecting Leo, and I couldn't let that happen. That's why I didn't just roll over. Sarah felt her heart ache for him. The case, the kick, the fight, it was all interwoven with this profound loss. It wasn't just about his own dignity anymore. It was about honoring the memory of his fallen brother. He would be so proud of you, Marcus, she said softly. Without thinking, she reached out and placed her hand over his on the hood of the car. His skin was warm, his hand calloused and strong. A current passed between them, a spark of connection that went far beyond lawyer and client. It was a connection forged in shared struggle, in late-night strategy sessions, and now, in this moment of profound vulnerability. He turned his hand over and laced his fingers with hers. His thumb gently stroked the back of her hand. It was a simple gesture, but it was more intimate than any kiss. It was an acknowledgement, an acceptance. Sarah, he said, his voice husky. Thank you. For what? For seeing me, he said. Not the uniform, not the file, me. They stood like that for a long time, the silence of the workshop wrapping around them like a blanket. The legal battle waiting for them outside seemed to fade away, replaced by this fragile, powerful new reality they were building together. The next morning, Sarah walked into her old office to collect the last of her things. She had been officially terminated. As she was packing her box, a junior public defender, a young man named David, approached her hesitantly. Sarah, I'm sorry about what they did, he stammered. It's not right. No, it's not, she agreed, offering him a sad smile. He looked around nervously, then leaned in closer. Listen, about the courtroom cameras. They're not broken. Sarah froze. What did you say? They're not broken, he repeated, his voice a whisper. They're backed up to a secondary off-site server, a fail-safe system. The IT guys were talking about it. Management told everyone to keep quiet, but what Miller did was wrong. Everyone knows it. He scribbled something on a sticky note and pressed it into her hand. This is the IP address for the server access portal, and the name of an IT tech who owes me a favor. It's all I can do. Good luck. He scurried away before she could even thank him. Sarah looked down at the sticky note in her hand. Her heart hammered against her ribs. It was the smoking gun. The key. She ran out of the building, her box of belongings forgotten on the desk. She didn't go to her car. She called Marcus. I've got it, she said, her voice breathless with excitement and adrenaline. I've got a way to get the footage. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Marcus's voice. calm and steady as always, but with a new undercurrent of steely resolve. "Good," he said, "because I found something too. I found another one of Miller's victims, and this one is a cop." The cop's name was Sergeant Frank Rizzo. He was a 20-year veteran of the HPD, a grizzled, old-school detective with tired eyes and a deep-seated love for the city he served. He had been Miller's training officer 5 years ago. They met in a noisy diner that smelled of bacon and regret, a neutral ground where blue uniforms held no special power. Rizzo stirred his coffee, the spoon clinking rhythmically against the ceramic. "Miller," he sighed, his voice raspy. "I knew that kid was a problem from day one. A cowboy. All ego, no sense. Thought the badge gave him a free pass to be a bully." Marcus and Sarah listened, rapt. This was more than they could have hoped for. "I wrote him up twice," Rizzo continued, his eyes on his coffee cup. "Once for roughing up a kid he'd caught shoplifting. Kid was all of 15. The other time for pulling his weapon on a driver during a traffic stop. No provocation, just wanted to show who was boss. I recommended he be washed out of the program, said he was a lawsuit waiting to happen." "What happened to your reports?" Sarah asked, her pen poised over her notepad. Rizzo gave a bitter laugh. "What do you think happened? Miller's uncle is a deputy chief. The reports disappeared. I was told to reevaluate my assessment. I was transferred out of training a month later. The message was clear. Stay in your lane." "Would you be willing to testify to this?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with anticipation. Rizzo looked up, first at Sarah, then at Marcus. He held Marcus's gaze for a long time, a silent conversation passing between two men who understood the weight of a uniform and the code that was supposed to come with it. "He dishonored the badge," Rizzo said, his voice low but firm. "What he did to you in that courtroom. That's not who we are." "Yeah, I'll testify. It's long past time someone held that punk accountable." They left the diner with the final crucial piece of their puzzle. They had the pattern of behavior. They had a credible witness from inside the blue wall of silence. And, thanks to Sarah's young colleague and a very cooperative IT technician, they had a grainy but undeniable video file. They watched it for the first time in Sarah's new, makeshift office, a corner of her own apartment. The footage was from a high-angle security camera, the quality poor. But it was clear enough. You could see Miller's path deviate. You could see his foot connect with the back of Marcus's leg. You could see Marcus's body go rigid. It was the irrefutable truth, captured in 240p. Sarah saved the file to a thumb drive, her hands trembling slightly. "This is it, Marcus. This is everything." He looked at the screen, at the silent, grainy replay of his own humiliation. But he didn't feel the sting of it anymore. He felt a cold, calm sense of purpose. He looked at Sarah, at the fierce, triumphant light in her eyes, and he felt a warmth that chased the cold away. "We've got him," he said. The civil lawsuit they filed was an explosive device dropped into the heart of the HPD. It alleged assault, battery, and a conspiracy to cover up a pattern of abuse, naming both Officer Miller and the city of Houston. With Rizzo's affidavit and the video evidence attached, it was impossible to ignore. The city's lawyers, who had initially dismissed Sarah as a disgruntled ex-public defender, were now scrambling. They offered a settlement, a generous one. Sarah and Marcus sat in her living room, the official offer on the coffee table between them. It was enough money to change both of their lives, enough for Sarah to open her own private practice, enough for Marcus to expand his workshop, to live comfortably without ever worrying about a bill again. "It's a lot of money," Sarah said quietly. "They want this to go away. They want to avoid a public trial." Marcus looked at the document, then at her. "It was never about the money." "I know," she said, a proud smile touching her lips. "But I had to present it, so what do you want to do?" "I want him on the stand," Marcus said, his voice like flint. "I want him to have to answer for what he did. In public, I want a reckoning." Sarah leaned over and picked up the settlement offer, tearing it neatly in half. "A reckoning it is," she said. The deposition was held in a sterile conference room in a downtown law firm. Officer Miller was there, flanked by two expensive-looking city attorneys. His swagger was gone, replaced by a sullen, resentful glare. He looked smaller without the uniform. His power diminished under the fluorescent lights. Sarah was masterful. She was no longer the overwhelmed public defender, but a razor-sharp litigator. She began calmly, establishing the facts of the case, her voice even and professional. Then she moved in for the kill. She had Rizzo's testimony read into the record. She questioned Miller about the complaints from Cynthia Williams and others they had uncovered. With each question, Miller grew more agitated, his denials becoming weaker, more desperate. Then, Sarah placed a laptop on the table and turned it to face him. "Mr. Miller, I'd like you to watch a short video with us." She pressed play. The grainy footage filled the screen. The conference room was silent, save for the hum of the air conditioning. They all watched the cowardly kick. They all saw Marcus's reaction, or lack thereof. When it was over, Sarah paused the video on the moment of impact. "Officer Miller," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying across the room with lethal precision. "Can you explain to me what you were doing in this video?" Miller stared at the screen, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked to his lawyers, but they stared stonily at the table, offering no escape. "Let me ask you another way," Sarah pressed, standing up and walking around the table to stand directly in front of him. "My client, Senior Chief Marcus Thorne, is a Navy SEAL. He has been awarded the Navy Cross for his heroism in combat. He is a man who understands discipline and control in ways you cannot possibly imagine. On that day, in that courtroom, when you assaulted him from behind, he made a choice. He chose to honor his code, his training, and his country by not reacting. My question for you, Mr. Miller, is what is your code? What code allows a man in your position to commit such a cowardly, dishonorable act?" The room was electric with tension. Miller finally snapped, his voice a venomous hiss. "He was disrespecting me. He had it coming. He thinks he's better than me, with his fancy car and his war hero stories." It was the confession they needed, the admission of motive. The anger, the jealousy, the prejudice, all laid bare. Marcus, who had been silent throughout the entire deposition, finally spoke. His voice was not loud, but it commanded the attention of everyone in the room. "I don't think I'm better than you, Miller," he said, his eyes locking onto the disgraced officer. "I know I am, because my honor isn't something I wear on a sleeve. It's something I live by. You wouldn't understand." It was the final, devastating blow. Not a physical strike, but a moral one. Marcus had won. He had struck back with integrity, with truth, and with the help of the fiery, brilliant lawyer by his side. The city settled the next day for a sum that was significantly higher than their initial offer, with one non-negotiable condition from Sarah. Officer Miller was to be fired and his record made public. That evening, Marcus and Sarah stood in his workshop. The legal battle was over. The war was won. "We did it," she said, a hint of disbelief in her voice. "You did it, Sarah," he corrected her. "You were incredible." He stepped closer to her, his large frame seeming to fill the space. He gently cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones. "You fought for me. I'd do it again in a heartbeat," she whispered, her heart pounding. "I know," he said. And then he lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of frantic passion, but one of deep, profound gratitude and affection. It was a kiss that sealed their alliance, that acknowledged the bond that had been forged in the crucible of their fight for justice. It was a kiss that promised a new beginning. In the quiet of the workshop, surrounded by the ghosts of the past and the promise of the future, two warriors from two very different worlds had finally found their peace together. Marcus Thorne's story is a powerful reminder that the toughest battles are often not fought on foreign soil, but within the quiet halls of justice and the depths of our own character. It's a story about resilience, about how a decorated Navy SEAL struck back not with force, but with an unwavering commitment to his own code of honor. It's a testament to the fact that true strength lies in discipline, integrity, and the courage to remain standing when the world tries to knock you down. But more than that, it's a story about connection. It shows how the fierce determination of one person, like the lawyer Sarah Jenkins, can change everything, and how, in the fight for justice, we can find the most unexpected and beautiful forms of love. Their journey reminds us that we are all stronger when we stand together. If this story of courage, honor, and unexpected love moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear a story of hope and resilience. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible true life stories that inspire and uplift. Thank you for watching.